Hi everybody, it's Eli. For my memoir of choice, I chose Acid for the Children by Flea. Um, when I first saw the book, I was definitely intrigued by the title. I didn't really know what it means, and I still honestly don't know what it means. He never really explains it in the book. Um, the best, the best idea I can get from it is that maybe he he did do a lot of drugs as a kid, and he talks about openly about his experience with drugs. And he was a child when he did the drugs, and he talked about some acid. He did acid as a kid. That's the only thing I can really get away from what the title means. But other than that, I really appreciated this book. If you don't know who Flea is, he's the bass player for Red Hot Chili Peppers, which is one of my favorite bands. And Flea's one of my favorite people. I love Flea. And I heard he wrote a book, and it was just perfect timing because I wanted to read it, and we had to do this for school, so I thought I'd just go ahead and read it. Basically, this book doesn't talk about his experience or time with the Red Hot Chili Peppers or his fame and glory. All the book really talks about is just his childhood and how he grew up and where he grew up and how he became the person he ended up being. So his real name's Michael. And he grew up. He was born and raised until he was around 9 years old in Australia with his mom and his dad and his sister Karen. Um, and in Australia, he doesn't remember much. He remembers it being very, very hot, and he remembers a few stories about him getting in trouble or just uh, for school or whatever. And he wasn't a very popular kid. He was always very, very quiet. He was kind of an outcast and a misfit. That's what he described himself as. Um, but he used to get. He told a story about how his mom got a call from somebody from school, and how he sat alone at lunch and he didn't seem to care. He just sat there, ate his lunch, and his mom asked Michael about it, and he was like, "Why do you do that?" He says, I didn't really notice what I was doing," and he said, "This is how I am. I like to be alone." So he was definitely a very different kid, and so at the age of probably around 9 or 10, his parents got a divorce, and his mom, Patricia, met a new man who's became her boyfriend, and his name was Walter. He was a bass player, which is exactly what Flea does, but Flea plays a electric bass, and Walter played an upright bass, which is different, but it's still the same instrument. And that's where Michael became and fell in love with music, and I found that very cool. So they moved to New York, and when they moved to New York, he grew up in Manhattan with his sister Karen, Walter, and his mom. And at this point, he lived in New York from when he was 10 till around 13 or 14. So he was becoming he left when he was becoming a teenager. And in New York, he just remembers in the basement, Walter and the family would have gigs. They'd have his friends over, Walter's friends over, and they'd all play music, and he loved it. He loved music. He said it made him feel like he wanted to dance. It made him feel magical, and that's how he fell in love with music. And then after a few years in New York, um, for Walter's career in music, they decided to move to Los Angeles, which is where Michael considers himself where he actually grew up. And in Los Angeles, is that he actually kind of got into trouble at first in Los Angeles. He became a frequent shoplifter. He would steal a lot of things. That's just when he got introduced to drugs and all that stuff. And he writes that was probably one of the darkest points in his life. Um, and I think it's crazy, at such a young age how you're introduced to that, and it's sad. But he said that it kind of, it shaped him to who he is, and even though bad experiences happen to you, you can still become, a good person out of it. And he is a good person, even though he makes mistakes, and he still has drug problems, but he's a good person. Um, and then also talks about how he met Anthony Kiedis, which is the lead singer and frontman for Red Hot Chili Peppers. That he met them in high school, and they instantly, he says, just became best friends. It was just like that. Um, he was all Anthony was very similar to Michael, and he was also kind of a misfit kid, and he didn't really have any friends, and he was an outcast, and I think that's why they work so well together is because they're similar, but they're also very different. Flea says that, or Michael says that, out of all the people that Anthony could hurt him the most because there's just so much chemistry there, and they do love each other and they're best friends, and he says you can never top a friendship with like the friendship that they have, and they're still friends. They're in a band together. They've been in a band together since the '70s, and they still make music, um, and they just have such a strong connection together that can't be broken. Um, so it talks about how he met Anthony as a kid, and then it talks about some other struggles he had with drugs and some problems like that, and that's where it ends. It doesn't really go into much detail about his. I mean, it briefly talks about his experience with Anthony making the band, but it doesn't talk much about anything more than it doesn't talk more about the band. It doesn't talk about the stardom. Um, it really just talks about his childhood, and he said that he didn't want to go into things about his his popularity and becoming famous. Um, and I like the conclusion I wrote on the paper, so I'm gonna read that for you. In conclusion, I really love this memoir. I already love the Red Hot Chili Peppers; they're one of my favorite bands, and I already love Flea. He's an amazing bass player. And I think it did give me an appreciation for their music and Flea himself, and it really, I guess, made me realize that he's actually a real person, and he's gone through a lot of things, and that really was awesome to learn about, and I would really recommend this book for all music lovers if if you're familiar with the band or if you're familiar with Flea, or you just like music in general. I think you would really like this memoir. So yeah, I like I said, I really enjoyed it. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. It was a good read. See you guys.